You're listening to the Outdoors Group podcast. This podcast is a call to arms to get children and young people outside again. It's your one-stop shop for all things outdoor, child, young person and education related. Thanks for tuning in. In this episode, we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Maria and Harry from Right to Roam. Right to Roam are a group dedicated to campaigning for increased access to the land and waterways of England and Wales for everyone. They believe that nature should be accessible for all and that the ancient custom of roaming across open countryside should be reinstated and protected in law. They were involved in the Challenge to Dartmoor's Wild Camping earlier this year, as well as organising the mass trespass at Kinder Reservoir in Derbyshire in April to celebrate 90 years since that historic event. Really excited to have you both here, so thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you very much.
No, you're really welcome. So I think it'd be really useful to start just by explaining the history of Right to Roam and the context in which the organisation came to exist. And I know that we could obviously do like an hour on land access alone, but just kind of key points would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. So so the Right to Roam movement, it kind of starts off wherever you want it to, because it kind of arguably starts off back in 1066 when William the Conqueror came to England and said that he was going to divide the country between his barons, and basically that meant that over half of the land in England became owned by less than 1% of the population. But that's still the case today. We haven't really improved since then. And we kind of saw a gradual erosion of commoners' rights, basically, of the rights of the commoners ever since then. In like 1604, there were acts passed called enclosure, which basically took people away from the commons where they were living. And ever since then, we've seen greater reduction in access. And a lot of the land access movement hasn't really stopped since then. But the beginnings of the modern land access movement started in the very late 19th century, where people were kind of like, people wanted more space from the industrialized towns they were living in, and they were trying to get out and about, and they were getting beaten up by the gamekeepers for doing that kind of thing. And then this culminated in the 1930s when you had what's now passed into legend as the Kinder Scout mass trespass. And basically, this was led by young working class people from Sheffield and Manchester who, were working in the mills and all the rest of it, and they were being, facing a lot of them. These leaders of this trespass were Jewish, and they're facing a lot of anti-Semitism at the time. They're facing a lot of classism, and they basically said that they were going to deliberately trespass on the moors and have a mass trespass together to win that right to roam. And they got beaten up for it and thrown in jail, but it galvanized an entire movement of people that were going to take direct action for the right to roam. So the process has been going ever since then. In 1949, the first national parks were created by the Attlee government. It was supposed to incorporate right to roam in a sort of, because the NHS was created about the same time, and the plan was going to be to also have a sort of natural health service. This was the generation that was obsessed with fresh air and exercise and that kind of thing. So right to roam was very much included as part of that initially planned, but it didn't unfortunately happen. Momentum continued to increase, and then in the late 1990s, there was a land access movement in the early 2000s because the new Labour government got in and they promised a Right to Roam Act. And unfortunately, that also got watered down. But what we got was 8% access to land. So along with footpaths, we got a very small, limited, they call it the Right to Roam, well, they actually call it the Countryside Rights of Way Act or Crow Act. But it hasn't really opened up the countryside for all of us to enjoy. So we're still now barred from 92% rather than basically 100% of the countryside.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we come in for the Right to Roam campaign. The movement has been started through, it was founded at the same time as lockdown, when I'm sure you'll remember, we were told we had, one activity of exercise a day and everyone was going out and realizing a lot of their favorite paths to walk on were being increasingly enclosed by landowners, by, corporations, perhaps, all of this kind of thing. And we began to argue that, it's not us, the public, that are responsible for if we're going out, if people are working class, for trying to go out into a park. It's the only places you can go now. We've been robbed of so much of the countryside. And people will say to us, well, aren't you hurting nature by doing this? We think that, you have to love nature. In order to love nature, you have to be able to have access to it, basically. Yeah. So the Right to Roam campaign, I guess, was kind of founded on the principle. It's not really, we didn't kind of found this on a kind of sort of hardcore protest movement style thing, although we acknowledged it's got really important roots in that. We're just trying to have a kind of like fairness for everyone, really, equal access to everyone and for nature, really. So we started in 2020, and we think we've been making a lot of progress since then, and we're feeling optimistic. And we want to do this as broad a church as possible and invite people from all walks of life out for a kind of like fun days out in nature, also looking at the serious sides of why this is so important.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think I realised that you'd only started in 2020. I think I in my head you'd been around for a lot longer, so that's really interesting that you seem to have like made quite a big impact and achieved quite a lot in a short space of time, which is great. So what's the goal of Right to Roam? What are you guys ultimately hoping to achieve?
So the goal is a Right to Roam Act. So we want enshrined in law equal access for everyone. So currently, depending on which constituency you live in, access is very unequal. If you live somewhere near the Peak District, for example, constituencies there have much more than 8%, whereas there's some counties, around Lincolnshire and areas to the east where actually like access is zero. So this 8% is like a total average of the whole country of England. And so what we are aiming for with the Right to Roam Act is to level this out for all constituencies to have an extended right to roam as a default, and then with exceptions. So essentially the case in Scotland is that there's this default right of access, and then there are many exceptions, for example, nature reserves, for example, triple SIs, crops. There's definitely areas that should be protected. However, the default is access. Essentially, this would equalise people who are usually excluded from land, and they'll be looking out at a landscape maybe beyond their window if they live on the edge of a town or a city, but like their right to access that might not be very high at all. They might actually not even be a footpath through there. So we see a Right to Roam Act as basically levelling that out. It is one step, and the next steps are that essentially we're aiming for this Right to Roam Act so that this can then open up for other organisations to then use the land around them. So projects that are increasing people's confidence at spending time outdoors. This is like the baseline for all of those organisations to have more access.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned obviously Scotland have got that right. So that was the Land Reform Act for them. And that was 20 years ago, wasn't it? So how's it worked in practice? Like, I'm assuming it's working. Like, you don't hear anything about it.
Yeah. So on the whole, the Scottish Outdoor Access Code, which gives them sort of it's like their version of the Countryside Code, which is much more like better than ours, and the Land Reform Act, which gave them the right to roam, is working pretty well. It's opened up the vast majority of the Scottish countryside. Obviously, there's some exceptions. You don't walk across literally people's back gardens or schools or anything like that. Their back garden is 10,000 acres. It's okay, that kind of thing. You'll notice also that the rivers in Scotland are in a much better situation than they are in England, and they've all got access. Yeah, so it is much better in Scotland, but there are also some problems there. It's like it's not like a lot of people don't even understand that the right to roam really applies to them. It's not necessarily being promoted as much as possible, and similarly, access again is unequal. So for disabled communities and a lot of people of colour and working class communities, there is still that lack, that some barriers, and lack of access to green space within 15-minute ride from Edinburgh or Glasgow, whatever it might be. There are issues. There's also issues on like where people are doing grouse shooting, which of course is large parts of Scotland where people are not allowed to have access. And of course the Scottish Outdoor Access Code, while it's much better than the English Countryside Code, doesn't properly incorporate, we don't think, necessarily quite enough in terms of people's rights and responsibilities in nature. We think there should be elements that really encourage people to not only just leave no trace, but leave a positive trace, to be doing good things in nature, And this is a kind of philosophy we've developed at Right to Roam we call wild service. We're trying to talk about people leaving a positive trace, whether it's through tree planting or litter picking, all of this kind of thing, rather than just through saying leave no trace. But on the whole, Scotland is still doing a lot better. We have a Scottish local Right to Roam group that's helping to push some of these issues, but it's very much the benchmark that we're aiming for, and then to go much further than that in the future.
Go beyond that, yeah. So when they were talking about bringing that in Scotland, was there opposition from landowners and things? Like, do you guys know how it was received initially?
Marie might know more about that, actually.
I think that there would have been some opposition. I have to say, I'm not too sure what it was. But what I do know is that because there was a default access. So in Scotland, everybody was doing it anyway.
Yeah.
So in Scotland, there was this default of access because everyone was doing it anyway. People were accessing wild spaces. People were walking. They had this understanding of their own right to roam, and so it was much easier for the law to come in because people were doing it anyway. So it became, okay, well, let's give extended access and then have exceptions. Whereas that just for some reason, when it was applied in England, got flipped. So we had a default of no access and then some exceptions where you do have access. So that's kind of how it changed, and hence why the mechanism of our campaign is to get people trespassing, to get people using these landscapes for that same aim, to show that actually when we do access, it is positive. As Harry mentioned, we are leaving positive traces. We are learning about how to care for the environment. We're encouraging people to build their confidence outdoors and show that actually the public are not a danger. In fact, the public are the least of our worries, and very often on our trespasses, we'll come across wildlife crimes and like things that people are doing to treat the landscape really unethically, that we as the public wouldn't dream of doing. Like, that's not why we're going out into the woodlands. We're going out to enjoy time with our friends and or with our family, or even just have time solace alone by a river. So it's basically to kind of show that.
And so what's the plan for trying to achieve those same rights? You've obviously talked about the kind of those mass peaceful protests. Kind of what other things are Right to Roam doing?
Well, I can chat a little bit about our local group. So we've got this network of local groups forming where we are supporting people and small groups of people to look at land access where they live. What is the situation there? What is the land justice network like? And to connect with it and to bring in this idea that we can walk on this land. It's not a criminal offence, it's a civil offence. So we are encouraging our local groups to explore that landscape and explore the history of their exclusion where they are. That filtering down, decentralising it, encouraging people to do it just as part of their everyday walks, just to go a little bit further beyond the footpaths and find out about the landscape. What state is the river in near where you are? Essentially we're encouraging our local groups to then connect with this existing land justice, health justice and social justice network, to basically make a really strong web of understanding about what's been happening and how we can move to change it. And
I think I would just add, it is all about justice really, and about connecting people to the land. It's also about having fun. We're not being angry, we're not being shouty at anyone. What we're doing is just celebrating a landscape and celebrating our connection to nature. So for anyone listening who listens to this podcast a lot, who likes going outdoors, remember that 92% of the countryside is barred to us. We're banned from it, and we're wrongfully banned. Why did that countryside get taken away? It's because we were poor and the rich took it from us, basically. But regardless of who owns the land now, we feel that we should all have a right to access it. And we've got people, landowners will say, well, we have 144,000 miles of right to way in this country, but that's less than 0.2% of land in England or something like that. But we've only got 8% of that and 3% access to rivers. It's just really not fair at all. But when you kind of really step out there, it's not, we call it a trespass, but it's really just about a celebration of and kind of reconnecting with our rights to nature and having fun with one another, really.
Yeah, because I mean, you guys just mentioned that it's a civil offence, not a criminal offence. So I guess if that would be one of my questions, if someone was thinking I'd like to get involved, but they're a bit worried about potential consequences, can you explain kind of what the difference is and what that means for people taking part in these events or trespassing on their own?
Yeah, totally. So the thing that I definitely found myself when I first heard about the campaign as well was, okay, so this makes sense to me, morally. I can understand, in a heart-centered way, or I can understand, on a wider perspective, why this is important. But I was really nervous about, okay, but what does that mean? What am I involving myself in if I was to do it? Or what am I inviting someone into if I ask them to come with me? And so as part of our local group sort of education, we are providing and giving resources for local groups themselves to get to know their rights. So understanding exactly this. So a civil offence essentially means that the parish council can be consulted by the landowner if the landowner has an issue, and then there's like a long drawn out process where you may end up being fined at the end of it. What we found is that the likelihood of that happening is very low, although must be said that it is obviously a possibility depending on the kind of anger of the landowner and determination, but it costs them a lot of money. And it's very long and drawn out, so they probably might not bother. But that's essentially what you're facing. And so if you were to go onto the land and somebody asked you to leave and you left, then that's absolutely fine. Nothing can happen.
Yeah.
Whereas if you then refuse to leave and start making, maybe being antagonistic, or maybe you've clearly broken something of theirs, like a fence, or tried to be, as I say, antagonistic, then there's more grounds for them to kind of prosecute in that civil law, with the parish council. So depending on obviously how you trespass, so as Harry mentioned, like the aim of this is for us to explore the landscape. Once we are met with somebody, if the situation makes you feel very uncomfortable, you can just leave. You could just say, okay, great, I'll be on my way, thanks for that, and off you go. It also does help, like I say, to know your rights, because then it kind of gives you a bit more confidence to know that you're not breaking any criminal law. That being said, like your heart rate might still race slightly, even knowing that. So it's good to be with people that you trust and feel confident with. Hence why we're trying to build these local group communities for people to learn about these rights and to go out there and understand that actually, like, if it gets too much, they can literally walk away and like there is nothing that can be done.
And I'm guessing some of the estates that you've trespassed on are so massive, like so many thousands or hundreds of acres, that you probably don't see anyone half the time anyway.
That's just what I was thinking, actually. Like, honestly, I've been trespassing since I was a child, because I grew up in one of these eastern counties where you have basically no access to land, even though it's the countryside. I have never in my life, and neither has Nick Hayes, who wrote the book of Trespass, I don't think, ever actually met the landowner who owns the land at all. You never see them at all, because at the worst you might see a gamekeeper or someone like that who might work on their behalf, but we're talking about tens of thousands of acres. You very rarely see anyone. So there are these kind of like civil trespass, and you see signs saying trespassers will be prosecuted, but that's not possible. But you can't prosecute someone for trespass. So these are, we talk about the issues and we make sure everyone's comfortable, but not even 9 times out of 10, more than 9 times out of 10, we just have a really lovely day out. It's fantastic, and we showed the government and everyone there's nothing to worry about a right to roam. It's a fun day out, family-friendly day out in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned just a minute ago the access to rivers. Do you say 3% of rivers in England? Like, that's a really small. I mean, I'm lucky in Devon because we've got 2 big rivers running through the Dart, and you can walk up and down them because it's on Dartmoor. So I hadn't really thought about the fact that lots and lots and lots of people are living somewhere where there's no access to waterways. Like, that's massive. So can you tell us about the challenges of accessing like those kind of areas?
Sure. So when we first set up our organisation, we were focusing on the areas which we thought were most relevant to the public, and B, we thought could have most of the influence over, basically. So we talked about like woodland and the greenbelt and rivers and downland, basically. These areas, especially places like the greenbelt, if we had access to public access to that, then enormous millions of people would be able to access it. Enormous amounts of the public would be able to access it. If we had access to the greenbelt, then because the greenbelt hugs cities, then millions of more people would be able to access nature through that. And likewise with rivers, this country has got crisscrossed and rivers flowing everywhere. And as I was saying earlier, Scotland, where they can access rivers, they've got a lot more better quality rivers, and it's a lot better for the public. But it's a kind of a little bit of a grey area with rivers, but we do know that I think 97% of rivers have no uncontested right of access. So basically, on the whole, you can't access them, which is outrageous. But we focused on these areas to begin with because we thought we could have a big impact over them. We thought they were particularly important. But, we don't want to just marginally improve access. We don't want to increase it by 10% or 20%. We want the full right to roam that they've got in Scotland. And that should be the minimum, really, of what we're actually asking for. So that was the kind of start. But what we're really aiming for now is a full right to roam where all can enjoy nature and look north, basically, is the kind of motif for this. Look at Scotland and see how we can.
Yeah. I was just, when you said look north, I was also about to ask about other countries and what how do we compare to other places around the world for and I know that's a big question because of course every country is different, but where do we kind of sit in that kind of do you guys know?
Yeah, it's interesting. Basically we sit pretty badly, but it's not just in terms of the right to roam, but we are one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, the UK, which is strange. But I mean, I was looking on Google Earth the other day, all around the world. If you zoom in on a random country, on the whole, you're going to find forest. If you zoom in the UK, you will find fields, especially England, right? You will just find fields. And that's been done deliberately. It's not naturally just fields. So we are one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, but we also rank bottom in terms of nature connectedness of like pretty much all European countries. And that's not a coincidence. You don't have access to nature, you can't care about nature. So in terms of public access as well, there are many other countries, Estonia, Finland, Sweden, Norway. All of these countries have got the right to roam. I was in Greenland a while ago. They've got the right to roam, like a lot of countries. And there is like a kind of Scandinavian model that has a really positive approach to this, where it encourages you to get outdoors, and it just says do so responsibly, basically. From a reasonable distance from someone's actual personal house or something like that. But on the whole, trusting people to behave well in nature, and then they will. So I think we can learn a lot from that. And the fact that we've got this fantastic Scottish model just across the border, there's no reason why we couldn't do it in England. Only 9% of England is built upon. So the idea that it's vastly different from Scotland isn't true, really. So the rest of it is hidden. If this country is full, it's just full of green space, but it's hidden behind barbed wire and brick walls at the moment.
And big fences, yeah. I'm going to play devil's advocate here just a little bit. When you just talk about respecting the land, how do you address people's concerns about things like protecting, fragile ecosystems or respecting farmers or land or animals and crops? Like, because I'm guessing that's something that people probably say quite a lot. So what's the kind of response that you guys have for that?
Yeah, totally. That is often what people say. I mean, even some, wildlife charities and conservation groups have this concern too, which is understandable if they are working really hard to try and protect what we have left. But essentially, we really believe and understand that we cannot learn how to care for nature, as Harry mentioned earlier, without being in it and learning about it. There is just absolutely no way. So a lot of this like misunderstanding that the public have maybe about how to connect to nature, or even just what nature's doing in the year. So what are the ground nesting birds doing? What time do they nest? When should we keep our dogs on leads, or when should we take them somewhere else? It's just a life cycle, yearly life cycle that we don't really understand unless we're out in it. So although it might seem quite scary, we do need to be out there in order for the greater public to actually understand these sort of ecosystems and environments, as you say. Yeah. So we also are really speaking with farmers. We're in dialogue with lots of farmers and lots of farmers unions, and making sure that when we do have this Right to Roam Act, when the Land Reform Act does come in for England, that it does take into account the farmers' concerns, as I say, like the farmers, the cycles through their own seasons and like what would work for them, because they are custodians of that land. One other thing to bear in mind is that, ownership doesn't always mean protection. It doesn't mean that the people actually owning that land are protecting it. So then on these sort of, say big estates, or even just these massive swathes of woodland that no one has been in except for a couple people, who's to say that they're actually being cared for as well? So like it's really this idea that the public are wrecking stuff is just not the case. We obviously live in a world where there is things like litter, and there are things like little dog poo bags all over the place. But if people have a sense of ownership over a place, or they feel like they're welcome there, then that doesn't tend to happen. So we need to shift that. And, in the same way that when seatbelts came in, and people were like up in arms about the fact that seatbelts should be incorporated into law, now we wouldn't think twice about it. So we need to have a think about facing forward and looking forward as to what it could be. And there will be some bumps in the road and people who are worried about stuff, and fair play. And we're really, really keen to invite those conversations to the table, and make sure that we're taking into account everyone's point of view.
Because I spoke to a very small landowner who's got 3-4 fields maybe, and they were saying, but what if they leave the gates open and the sheep get out? And I said, but surely it's better to educate than to have prohibition, everyone. And as you say, like, there's lots of things that have changed over time, like a really stupid example being like reusable water bottles. Like 10 years ago everyone was using disposable water bottles, but there's been enough education now that you don't see them as often, do you? So all about education, isn't it, really? And actually, the thing about ownership, we just did an episode with the Ada and Ouse Rivers Trust, who have just rerouted a bit of river, and the local landowners have opened up some fields so that they could reroute the river in there, and have kind of got permissive right of way now. And he talked about the local community and how they've just totally taken ownership of that land, and they're there regularly doing litter picks and like documenting the water quality and stuff. And you think, I think you're right. If you're experiencing it and take that ownership, then you want to look after it, don't you? Because we want to look after things that we care about.
Yeah, totally. And just to add on that, like, we are experimenting with different landowners with different ways to spread that education. So one solution that we're trialing is like QR codes on posts that then give you a whole bunch of information about, what season it is. Please close the gate. The lambs are in there, XYZ. I mean, obviously, we're just trialing that as one way, but we want to find new ways to share this education with people. So and
people are naturally curious. So if they see a QR code, they'll be like, oh, what's on there?
Kind
of piques our curiosity, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we probably should have asked this first, but I guess, and me and Harry spoke a little bit about this before we started recording, but my big question is why? Like, why does it matter so much? Why is it so important that we get this access back to the land?
I think it's everything, really. The land is everything. It's absolutely who we are. So all human beings rely on land and on green and blue spaces. So the fact that we're barred from 92% of the countryside in England just doesn't make any sense. And so many people listening will love the countryside and they'll love being outdoors. Might not necessarily know that we're barred from 92% of it. And even the places that we can see, those of us who are lucky enough to have privilege enough to be able to go and see wonderful mountains and all the rest of it, it's a very, very small part of what's actually there. And a lot of people living in cities and have no idea that what else is also out there. So I have a friend in Brighton who basically was saying that she'd spoken to 2 children who lived there. They were about 12, and they'd never been to the sea in their whole life. They lived in the north part of Britain. They'd never seen the sea in their like 12 years of their life. And it just goes to show you that access, there's so much more that needs to be done. We all know about the benefits of access to nature for our mental, physical health. Doctors are talking about it. The NHS estimates that we spend like billions of pounds a year healing sedentary lifestyles. So we can all really, really benefit from this. And I just think that, having access to nature, it shouldn't be seen as a naughty thing. The land was taken away from us. Having access to nature, it should be about, coming together, about the whole country coming together in terms of, healing this land and just healing one another, really, and looking after one another. So it's really great. And we can do that in a really kind of like welcoming way where everyone feels like they have access to nature. So it's really incredibly, incredibly important. And, I think also this idea that, we're blamed for nature. We're not the ones who are burning grouse moors or killing millions of pheasants or polluting our rivers. It's the same way like BP is saying, oh, watch out for your carbon footprint. They're burning all like these fossil fuels. So I think on the whole, fundamentally, it's very much a human thing. So just be in nature and have time in nature, and free, fair, and informed access to nature, which is what we're calling for, is the very minimum of what we need as a species, really. And I'm very much like confident that we're going to get there, and it's very important that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you just mentioned about free and fair, so that's a good time to segue into talking about the kind of the issue of equality of access. And again, we mentioned about this a little bit, but what are the problems that we kind of face when it comes to equality of access for people across a range of, income backgrounds, race backgrounds, all these kinds of things.
Yeah. So just on like a broad scale view of the country, 92 constituencies in England have no right to roam. So just to put that into perspective there, as well as, there might be issues with access for people with disabilities. So there might be in some places a gate, for example, that is a disabled gate, so like open for wheelchairs. But if that gate is sort of in the middle of a bunch of other gates that don't have that, then actually there isn't access there. So there's so many convoluted sort of issues that we need to unpick and expand on, so that people do actually feel like they can freely roam, because obviously a wider right to roam, just as it is, not considering those things, will only enable people who are white, able-bodied, accessing these landscapes. There are, for example, Dartmoor being like the tip of the iceberg, essentially, like with wild camping and these kinds of activities are usually only for people who have the money to do so, and feel like they belong in those landscapes. And so there needs to be a lot of work done, which already is being done, that we're connecting with, who are improving people's confidence, increasing people's confidence with actually getting outside, because actually it's one thing to actually have the access, but then in terms of a right to roam, but if there then isn't any kind of desire or like empowerment, if people don't feel empowered to go and use that space, then it's kind of useless. Because in Scotland there have been some issues with, like, they have the right to roam, but doesn't necessarily mean that everyone feels a sense of belonging and like they can access that. So yeah, as I say, it does tend to be white able-bodied people on the whole that feel this sense of ownership, or empowerment, should I say, like, of the landscape. And so it's really important, as we do enshrine this Right to Roam Act, that we connect with the organisations already doing this work, and empowering people to access that land. Because as I've sort of mentioned earlier, you could be right next to like a load of fields and the edge of your town, but who's to say that you feel like you can head out there? So yeah, we really want the Right to Roam Act to be in tandem and to link up all these organisations already doing that work, to both connect people to nature and help them feel a sense of empowerment, because the land is for everyone, which can be a particular barrier, especially if your heritage isn't from here or you don't feel that sense. So there's definitely issues there that, like, we're really looking to connect with and expand on.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was just pondering what you're saying, and I was thinking about me and Harry were talking earlier about groups like Peaks of Colour and things, and and just thinking about what you said about, if your heritage isn't from here, whether that makes you feel less able to access those lands and stuff. And it's a massive thing to consider, isn't it? Like, I just hats off to the groups doing the work to kind of trying to overcome those barriers, I guess.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people who will say to us that there aren't barriers, there aren't actual physical barriers, just that are sort of segregating the public by their heritage and by their skin color. But we know that there are enormous barriers, faced by people the entire time. And the statistics are really, really shocking when it comes to the lack of access to nature and levels of racism in the countryside as well, which is so strong. And it's important for people to really just understand that, there isn't parity of access, there isn't equity or equality of access at the moment at all. And the Right to Roam Act needs to incorporate, not just access to land, but, that's why we say free, fair and informed access, because we want, the fair access means we want proper access for everyone. And it'll be a long process, but it's an ongoing process, right, to ensure that everyone has that right to access nature and feel truly at home in nature, as we all should.
Yeah, absolutely. So if someone listening wants to, how can they get involved?
So there's a few ways. The first is to explore your local area yourself, like as much as you feel comfortable. So start walking, start roaming, cycling, and see how far you get to before you start to feel a little bit like, should I be here? And even just like testing the waters, no pun intended, in certain areas. just to see how much access that you do have, and understanding your local area, because there could be like a whole realm that you've never considered that might be just down the road, and then if you are seeing massive signs and you're seeing things that are making you feel anxious, head back and try and find some people to learn about it with, like maybe look up some stuff online together, learn a little bit about your rights, and the current situation, and build some confidence. So essentially you're building up to explore that landscape beyond the fences, and then start creating community around that. So start creating groups, maybe just even a few of you at a time, doing little, like you could do a book club, like learn about all the history as Harry was mentioning earlier, and to kind of get involved that way. But then we have existing groups as well that you could join, like if you wanted a bit more guidance, but they're involved in like sort of mapping their local landscape, and even if it's not with a Right to Roam local group, like connect with another land justice group. But there is so much movement out there, and there's a place for everyone in it.
Awesome.
I was going to say, please do get in touch with us as well, because we're just always keen to direct people where to go and to get people involved with a local groups network and that kind of thing. There were events and trespasses, and so it might be a musical thing, or it might be a kind of like fun dancey thing, or we've got loads of ideas really that encourage people out into nature and to explore that part of the countryside and further afield in the countryside as well. So do get in touch with us, and via our website or our social media, and we'd be more than happy to really welcome everyone in.
Yeah. I was going to say, I really love the emphasis on like fun and kind of joy that you've mentioned a few times, Harry. Like it can feel really serious, can't it, sometimes when you talk about big campaigning issues, but I love that that emphasis on like it's about having a good time outside, and it's really important to remember, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the whole point of it, really. I mean, we're not trying to we are like it's a very, very serious issue, but we're going to do this through like fun and through joy, and we're going to show everyone really that we mean no harm, and that we're here to enjoy nature. That's what nature is for, and that's what we deserve, really. And that's the whole point of the movement, really.
Point. Yeah, I was reading a book by Bell Hooks called All About Love, and she talks about how love needs to underpin all of these big kind of justice issues and stuff. And so you can kind of feel that from you guys today, which is really nice. Thank you so much for your time today, guys. I know you're super busy. Is there anything else you wanted to say about Right to Roam before we kind of wrap up?
I think I just wanted to mention as well, like to encourage people to talk about this with like the people that they know and love, and just to create it as part of a conversation, and maybe just to try and understand how much you do know or don't know, and like to kind of create it as part of our conversation, like just encourage you literally to talk about it around the dinner table, and we need to kind of rewrite this mentality that we've had for about 100 years now, that like we don't have this access and it's not for us, and we do really need to shift that, just to create it as part of conversation, so it's not something super scary.
Absolutely. Particularly important with kids as well, right? We found like we were walking by the river, and there was a fence that someone else had pulled down. I said, let's just go see what's on the other side, and we didn't walk very long before all three of my kids were saying, but Mum, we're not allowed to be here because there's a fence, so we shouldn't be on this side. And I was like, it'll be fine, like there's no one here, like someone for miles. But in the end we had to turn back because they're so anxious. But those kind of conversations with kids as well about it, isn't it? It's really important.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because like Nick Hayes, the founder of our campaign, talks about how every English person has got hundreds of years instilled into them a fear of like a sense of wrongdoing.
Yeah.
You can bet your bottom dollar that the landowners don't feel that sense of wrongdoing. The really big landowners, when they're kicking people off their 50,000 acre estates, they say that an English person's home is their castle, and their garden is their estate. But if their home is literally a castle and their garden is literally a estate, how much land do they really need for their exclusive use? And we shouldn't be the ones who are feeling wrong in just accessing the nature which belongs to everyone, really. Yeah,
absolutely. Awesome. I'm just going to finish up, if you've got time, just by asking. I've been asking everyone these 3 questions because it's a nice way to round things off, if that's okay. And the first one is, how do you relax?
So I think I've always said my whole life that I relax by going for a walk, and I do that every day. I have to admit that since I started like working for the Right to Roam campaign, it does mean that now when I'm walking around the countryside, I'm kind of thinking a lot about the campaign stuff sometimes when I'm walking. But I'm still able to enjoy it and really enjoy being in nature in many other ways. I also obviously like, listening to music and spending time with friends and, trying to bring back some of the collective joy that you kind of lost in former times, and trying to bring back some of that. And that's the kind of stuff that helps me relax and enjoy my life really.
Yeah, similar thing for me, like in terms of being outside. I really feel like by stopping, noticing all the little intricacies and like who's the bugs that are out at the moment, which plants, it really helps to switch my mind off of everything else. So yeah, essentially a lot of the reason why I was driven to this campaign is that like it feels wild that lots of people don't have that. And so yeah, that's definitely helped me, just like my nervous system just like completely changes.
Yeah. And what are you guys reading or listening to right now? So that could be music or podcasts or books, or just we'd love to have a recommendation for people.
Yeah, I've been reading a book called Breeding Sweetgrass recently, which is written by an Indigenous American botanist, and who basically talks about, we all know that humans are supposedly, we're told the whole time that humans are meant to be bad for nature, and she's saying this is totally untrue, and this has been kind of pushed upon us as a kind of propaganda, basically. There are many ways humans can be good for nature, and learning from Indigenous cosmologies about that is really important. The benefits we can have in looking after plants and that kind of thing. So it's quite relevant actually to Right to Roam and our relationship with nature. And yeah, I've been enjoying that a lot, and listening to some Dave Brubeck jazz music as well, which is very nice. Recommend both of those things, sometimes together.
I have been listening to this band called Gilsons. They're like a Portuguese band, and like, yeah, I'd really recommend it. Like, I can't speak Portuguese, but what I really love is that you can sense like what people are saying almost, you know what I mean, by the way that it's really beautiful. So I recommend people go and listen to some of their songs, see if you enjoy them.
Awesome. And finally, why is being outdoors important to you?
Yeah, so the outdoors is incredibly important to me. Basically, like, I grew up in the countryside, but in a place where we didn't have much access to nature at all. But just spending that time out there was just everything. And I think when we connect with nature, we're not just connecting with other species, we're connecting with ourselves really, and we're connecting with what it means to be human. And I think this is all, our ancestors back in the day were spending all their time outside, and I think this is who we are. So yeah, it's important for a million reasons really, and recommend everyone to be outdoors as much as you can.
Sort of just for me, it's this sense of space that I don't seem to find elsewhere. As I sort of mentioned, it's just this like nervous system just kind of quietens down a little bit, like the mind slows down, and I don't know if it's just my eyes that just dart across to like the different things, but it just really gives that sense of relief. There's countless studies about what it does to our brain and our nervous system, but once we start to develop that relationship, there's such a sense of feeling part of something bigger than yourself, which is just so amazing for building resilience when then we are met with stressful situations. Essentially, like, to deny people this right is absurd, and so it's just super important for everybody to have that right. Brilliant.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time today, guys.
It's been so nice to chat. Thanks, Hannah.
A massive thank you to Maria and to Harry for joining us to talk all about the Right to Roam organisation and what they're hoping to achieve, and about free and fair and equal land access for everyone. We really enjoyed talking to them, and we hope that you enjoyed listening to the conversation, and do go and check out their website and their social media to find out more about how you can get involved with that campaign. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, please like it, rate the podcast, share it with your friends so that more people can find us, and we'll be back in a fortnight with another episode. So until then, thanks for listening.